Hi, I'm Degé Coutee with Patient Advocacy Network at cannabissaveslives.org, and this is your weekly edition of the Compassion Flower Report. I have a number of stories I want to share with you. I have 4 legal-related stories to talk about, and then hopefully there's going to be enough time to talk a little bit about Utah, Florida, Oregon, Minnesota, West Virginia, and a lecture series coming up in Ontario, Canada. So let's dive right into it. The first news story, and I think it's the most important one of the evening this week, this is about Charles Lynch, and this comes from law.com, and it's the Ninth Circuit Cannabis ruling gives biz owner new chance to fight charges. And again, that's out of law.com. It says, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit on Thursday breathed new life into the defense of former Morro Bay dispensary owner Charles Lynch, sending his case back to a trial court to determine if his business was operating legally under California law before he was prosecuted and convicted on drug charges. That compliance finding will be key. If a judge decide Lynch's Central Coast Compassionate Caregivers was operating legally under state laws, his prosecution could be hampered by a federal appropriations rider that bars federal prosecutors from spending tax money pursuing state legal medical marijuana operations. Very interesting. Just a little bit of background from about Charles Lynch, if you're not familiar with who he was. Just to give you a little bit, this is directly from his Wikipedia page, which I'm pretty sure he maintains himself. In April 2006, Lynch obtained a medical marijuana dispensary business license from the city of Morro Bay. In July of 2006, Lynch was issued a medical marijuana nursery permit, which allowed him to provide marijuana plants to members of his dispensary. Lynch was also a member of the Morro Bay Chamber of Commerce. On March 29, 2007, the dispensary was raided by the local sheriff, Pat Hedges, in cooperation with the DEA. The dispensary reopened a week later with the blessing of the city of Morro Bay officials. The dispensary eventually closed on May 16, 2007, after the DEA threatened the landlord of the dispensary with criminal forfeiture of his property. On July 17, 2007, Lynch was arrested under federal law for marijuana trafficking and was convicted in August of 2008 of operating a drug premises, selling drugs to minors, distribution of over 100 kilos of marijuana, cultivating more than 100 plants, and conspiracy to distribute marijuana. During the trial, his attorneys were barred from referring to the legality of his business under state law. So, as you can see, this case has been going on a while. Charles C. Lynch, I believe he likes to have that C in his name, ran a well-known, established, and approved locally dispensary there in Morro Bay. He's got the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals throwing it back to the trial court and asking the trial court to determine if his business was operating legal under California law. Was operating legal. And at what time? In 2007, we didn't even have the Attorney General guidelines yet in the state of California. Proposition 215, the Compassionate Use Act, was still the law of the land. I don't know exactly how they're going to dissect this issue of state legality, given these dates. These dates really gave me chills to hear he was raided and then he reopened and then his landlord got the threat letter. It just really takes me back to that time in California when it was really dangerous to sell cannabis. And here he was selling cuttings. That's where the 100 plants and the kilos and all that comes in, because they were basically trying, because he was selling cuttings, the feds basically wanted to treat it like a kingpin kind of situation. So I think this is very interesting that the trial court is going to be forced to take a look at a couple things. Is that going to be the Attorney General guidelines, or is that going to be the new rules? Is it going to be taking what he was doing and applying it to the new rules? We know that in the state of California, the first step is having local approval, which he definitely had, which is very interesting. The other thing is, when he was arrested and raided and arrested, this rider that they're talking about, this is the Roybacher-Blumenauer amendment, which originally was the Hinchey-Roybacher amendment. And it definitely bars federal prosecutors from spending tax money pursuing state legal medical marijuana operations. That's definitely in effect now. But there are so many things that weren't in effect when Charles C. Lynch was raided. So definitely a story to follow. I am going to include a link of this story down below this video because I think it's really important. Diving into the next stories, this is out of the Motley Fool. Black market marijuana is a big problem, and this new survey proves it. Again, I'm gonna include this link down below too, so I think this is important. If you've been following the Compassion Flower Report at all, you know that this is something we've been talking about. Just a couple sentences out of this story. I'll let you take a look at it, but it's important because it's finally we're starting to hear other studies mirror what I've been saying has been going on here in California. Stamping out the black market isn't going to be easy. According to a new survey conducted by Market Review Research in California, out of the 1,419 people questioned, 1419 people questioned, 18% had purchased cannabis from an unlicensed source within the past 3 months. Of these black market purchases, 85% the consumers reported feeling completely or very satisfied with their purchase, and an equally high 84% said they'd be likely to purchase from the same unlicensed source in the future. This is so significant because California, along with Canada and other legalized states and countries, are counting on tax revenue and competitive legal weed pricing to drive out unlicensed players. In California, some estimates made before recreational pot's January 1st, 2018 launch suggested it could generate $1 billion in annual tax revenue, atop what the industry was already bringing in through medical weed sales. Yet early indications are that this figure may fall well short of expectations, and taxation could be to blame. Again, this is a story called Black Market Marijuana is a Big Problem, and this new survey proves it in the Motley Fool. So yeah, that, like I said, that's one of the things we've been pointing to. I had a conversation with a colleague I've known for at least 14 years. He told me he hardly sees his old patients at all, and he flatly blamed the taxation. He says that is really killing the price. And what is always going to win in California is the fact that consumers, whether they're patients or recreational users, are used to spending on average about $35 an eighth for good marijuana. And if the cost of taxation and so forth and all the packaging and the expense of the new testing, even though it shouldn't have gone up 4 times, it did. Ultimately, all that's going back down to the consumer. And in California, the consumer is just going to find a more affordable source because a more affordable source exists. So hopefully California and any other state that's grappling with this is going to figure it out how to do this. Still on kind of the legal side, this is from the Reason blog. California police chief claims legal weed delivery could lead to assaults and homicides. It's scare tactic and it's a scare tactic and an inaccurate one at that, is the subtitle of this headline. You may have heard me mention this again. If you follow this report, you will have heard me talk about the fact that the legislature, as well as the Bureau of Cannabis Control here in California, they want to have delivery available as a statewide option, and the police chiefs, or the California Police Chiefs Association, is really against this. And again, they're claiming that it's going to lead to assaults and homicides. Delivery services have been around a long time already in the state of California, and we've had a banking issue, which is in this story a little bit, and we haven't had mayhem and murder yet. Let's put it this way: I've heard of way more vendors getting robbed in the parking lots of retail locations than I've heard of delivery drivers getting popped. But anyway, again, scare tactic of the police. Just a couple sentences out of this story. A proposal under consideration in California would allow marijuana businesses to deliver weed straight to people's doorsteps, even in places where it's illegal to sell pot. It's been nearly 2 years since California voters approved a ballot initiative legalizing marijuana for recreational use, and more than 8 months since the measure took effect. But marijuana sales are still banned in almost 85% of the cities and counties in the state. The person they interview here is a police chief by the name of David Swing. He's claiming that it's going to be more lucrative to hit a delivery driver than it would be to rob a liquor store. And he does cite the cash issue. And I get it. Dispensaries don't have banks. He's claiming that delivery drivers can have up to $10,000 in cash on them. I've been doing a lot of research on this like merchant services type scenario, and there are ways around allowing somebody to prepay online. They order online, they prepay online, and the driver comes out. And hopefully that will be something that we see more evident with this kind of scenario. I think it's the perfect scenario for this. And there's a good story. We'll get to the West Virginia story, and we'll tie these two together, because what they talk about that in this story, I think, comes back to this one. But yeah, I love this idea of statewide delivery services. Again, if you've been listening, you've heard us talk about on this show that we have these places in California we refer to as marijuana deserts, which is where there's little to no access. And I can guarantee you a delivery service is going to be happy to get up in places in some of the more remote areas and in these high deserts and these smaller communities where it's just they're never going to have a dispensary there. It would be such a long time, but to be able to have patients, be able to have access is a wonderful thing. So I hope this statewide delivery proposal passes. And again, we're just going to show the police that there's no problem. And again, we will refer to the Conversation, which is the blog where this came from. Legalizing medical marijuana shows no effect on crime rates in the U.S. Oh, did I fail to give you this little tidbit? going back to the police chief, it says under a proposed legal sell pot. We covered that one. I didn't miss anything on that one before we move forward. So yeah, legalizing marijuana shows no effect on crime rates in the United States. They said we analyzed city level data from states across the U.S. and found that medical marijuana laws have little effect on violent or property crime in nearly all medical marijuana states. In the case of California, the crime rates actually show substantial decrease of around 20%. So again, we're showing that medical cannabis, it doesn't increase crime. Once you legalize it and you're able to drop the value in it, then there's no need to. It's no longer expensive. It's the market is saturated. There's no way to get rid of it. If you steal it, what are you going to do with it? Just in terms of the substance itself, then you start talking about crime rates, a substantial decrease. There were a number of studies done here in California, and especially it was around dispensaries. And dispensaries put businesses in buildings, so you don't have boarded up buildings. They put in lighting and security cameras, and many of them have security guards and people who are willing to walk you to your car, and people who take a walk around the facility and pick up the trash, and that whole good neighbor policy. Just of being a mindful, watchful person in the community has decreased crime around dispensaries. So there's no surprise there. So that real quick are the four stories I wanted to share with you. Charles Lynch, the issue with the black market, the Police Chiefs Association here in California, and decrease in crime where we see medical marijuana. So on to news in some of the states here. Utah, this is out of the Salt Lake Tribune, and we've talked a little bit about Utah here on this program, and that's because the patients there and advocates have gathered enough signatures to put Proposition 2 on the ballot. And this has been really contentious. The number of stories out of Utah going back and forth, the proponents and the opposition, it's been really heated. And this says that Utah's medical marijuana campaign kicks off in a tailwind of support. And I guess they're saying that because I guess the day that they had their kickoff, it was really windy. Organized of Utah's medical marijuana initiative, which on Saturday officially kicked off its campaign. It said all ages event attracted hundreds of supporters who picked up T-shirts and long lawn signs to distribute in advance of the November election. So it was an official campaign kickoff event that they had this week. And then they've got a couple quotes from patients, which is really important. It's good to hear patients' voices and recognize why medical cannabis is the most important. Faith Corbin, who has a slow-growing brain tumor, came with her mother and younger siblings. The 14-year-old isn't old enough to cast a ballot, but is anxious awaiting the vote. They get some quotes from her mom in the story after that. Then they talk about Carolyn Bailey, is in a similar situation. She takes 7 medications for her multiple sclerosis, and many of the drugs have negative side effects. She says, I'd like my doctor to have the option to prescribe it. Bailey says she is connected through social media to many MS patients throughout the country. We are being treated with medical cannabis successfully. If approved by Utah voters, Proposition 2 would allow patients with doctors' recommendations to obtain a medical marijuana card and purchase cannabis products from privately owned dispensaries. The meat of the story here. A Dan Jones and Associates poll conducted for UtahPolicy.com found 64% of likely voters to be somewhat or strongly in support of the measure. However, several groups, including the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the Drug Safe Utah Coalition, made up of medical experts, clergy, law enforcement, educators, business sector, are opposed and say the initiative, as written, lacks procedural safeguards. So again, we're going to continue to follow that, but again, good to hear those patient stories of those people who helped get this on the ballot to hopefully make medical marijuana the law of the land in Utah, and the fact that early polling shows that they have really strong support. So hopefully that will continue. Story out of Florida, Miami New Times. It says 5 times Florida cities and local officials tried to stonewall medical marijuana. I'm not going to read you this story, but it just kind of breaks down quickly, just 5 points where it demonstrates that a Miami Beach commissioner, the Miami city attorney, and various mayors throughout the state have used tactics to try to sabotage or stymie medical marijuana laws in their communities from getting enacted. And then I guess there was a city employee who was fired for using medical cannabis. In one of these stories, I couldn't even go into it and read or watch the person's comments because I'm sure it would make me very upset. But I guess the Miami city attorney compared medical cannabis to pedophilia. Don't even get me started. And I guess over 100 cities in Florida have bans. So again, it's really not, I don't think that's too much different than a little bit of what we've seen in California. I mean, California is such a huge, diverse state, and we see a lot of different political ideas. California is not San Francisco. So yeah, hearing about mayors and mostly city council members and county commissioners or board of supervisors, more appropriately, supervisors and city council members, saying some pretty inflammatory things that aren't true. And we have our own deserts here. So Florida is looking, and again, one thing this story cites the 5 times Florida cities and local officials tried to stonewall medical marijuana. Their law has 70% support of that vote. Something else we've talked about on this show recently, and this story adds some detail. Patients react to new limits on Oregon medical marijuana. This is out of the Herald Leader. We talked about this. There was a story that came out with not a whole lot of detail other than the state was going to be limiting the quantity that can be sold. And this goes into a little bit more of why we've got a little bit more data since that first story came out. In August, a state analyst spotted dozens of suspicious transactions when he crunched cannabis sales data. A small number of medical marijuana card holders bought unusually large quantities of marijuana flowers on consecutive days. Oregon regulators suspected medical marijuana patients and caregivers were exploiting the system by buying cannabis to sell on the illicit market. The response was swift. The Oregon Liquor Control Commission, under pressure from federal officials to tackle the robust black market for marijuana, quickly issued a temporary rule that dramatically reduced the amount that medical marijuana card holders could buy in a day. Over 19 days in August, for instance, one medical marijuana card holder bought nearly 13 pounds of cannabis. Another bought 7 pounds over 10 days that month. Officials said the questionable transactions came from a small percentage of cardholders and that the typical purchase for most cardholders was 4 grams or less. Is it unnerving to anybody else that Oregon can track that specifically what card holders, as they refer to them, are buying, that I kind of astounded by that. I mean, imagine, if they want to know how much beer you're buying, or if you're buying cigarettes, or how many times you had fried chicken this week. Where is this going to go with this kind of tracking of people? Oregon has been in the crosshairs of U.S. Justice Department leaders for not doing enough to crack down on the black market. So they talk a little bit about that. Let me get into what the patients have to say. On Wednesday, patients and advocates for the medical marijuana program blasted the new limits as a contentious meeting of states at a contentious meeting of the state's Rules Advisory Committee. Advocates said medical marijuana patients sometimes need large quantities of the drug to make products they rely on to treat their conditions, and they accused the state of meddling with medicine. The Rules Committee, made up of marijuana industry participants and advocates, called on the Liquor Control Commission to restore daily purchase limits to 24 ounces. So, we're talking flower. And again, my next story is going to kind of go into that, right into that same issue. If you're someone who wants to make your own hash, wants to make your own topicals, maybe turn it into butter, all of the above, you need a lot. I don't know if you necessarily need 13 pounds all at once, but look, if you can get 13 pounds for really cheap, and you're somebody that likes to use like a cannabis olive oil or a cannabis butter, and you just have the time on your hands to just make a bunch of products and put them in your freezer. Not everything's nefarious, but if you noted by my emphasis there, they're saying that this jump in big sales, this 7 pound to 13 pound sales, these transactions happened with just a few number of card holders. This is not a giant and systemic problem. It's just a small problem, but they caught it and they jumped on it because they said federal interference. Now this is more an opinion piece. This comes out of a blog out of Minnesota called the Min Post, and it says, to make medical marijuana more affordable, allow patients access to marijuana flower. And this is by a Dr. Kyle Kingsley, and he is citing an issue that we see in Minnesota. It's not the only state. Same thing in New York, where they don't sell flower. Everything is either a tincture or a capsule, and everything's very controlled. And what Dr. Kingsley says, and I'm just going to read you again just a couple sentences out of his opinion piece. It says, patients on average. The first thing he does in this piece is he really praises Minnesota's program and how well it has worked for patients, and that these medicines are effective. But then he goes on to talk about how some patients can't access this. So his patients on average spend more than twice as much in Minnesota per month for their medical cannabis versus patients in states that allow cannabis flower. For Minnesota patients who cannot afford these medicines and who are getting no cannabis mediated relief whatsoever, safety-tested cannabis flower would be more compassionate and humane than no effective medicines at all. So, he wants to see patients have access to flower. Again, it's affordable. It's very controllable. And it gives patients an opportunity to make products if they want to make products. This next story comes out of WOWK TV 13, West Virginia. West Virginia medical marijuana remains in limbo. It's been so long, you probably forgot West Virginia was even a medical marijuana state. Medical marijuana is still not yet on sale in West Virginia, even though the legislature and governor approved legalized medical marijuana 18 months ago. I think their program is also very limited. Many banks who do business with the Mountain State government don't want to accept money for medical pot because there's been a threat of federal prosecution since marijuana is still illegal at the national level. So this story goes on to talk about the idea of basically a gift card that is prepaid and then redeemed at the location. The analogy they said is if you get a gift card at Home Depot, you can't use it at Walmart. So basically you're purchasing, you're prepaying for your medical cannabis on a card, and then they can use the card at the store. So again, it's a similar thing, like, and the reason I said we'd come back around to the story about the delivery service, if there's still an issue with paying online before the delivery driver gets there, if it's still going to be a situation where the delivery driver says, oh, I don't take cash, then yeah, there's maybe that member, that patron of that particular delivery services has a prepaid card, and it's something that the driver can swipe. Again, I think it's safer for everyone if the patient or the recreational user could just choose what they want online, prepay it. It comes to them the way, just like you do at a pharmacy, right? I mean, pharmacies deliver, and that's the way you do it. And I think that's a good way to handle it. So our final piece tonight, just real quick, I thought this was really interesting. Not that interesting, but this is where we're headed now that we have medical that's been around for going on a couple decades now, over 20 years of medical marijuana. And now adult recreational. This is out of Ontario, Canada, something called Degé, and it's cannabis and your golden years. And it's a lecture series. It's going to be 3 weeks in a row, Wednesday, October 10th, 17th, and 24th. So if you are in the in the Ontario area, you want to check out this lecture series, medicinal advantages of cannabis and how it helps seniors, recreational cannabis and what seniors need to know, and cannabis and the law, what's legal and what's not. So again, this is specific to Canada, and it's geared toward those in their golden years. And I think we're gonna be hearing a lot more and learning a lot more from our elders and using cannabis. And again, everything that all the stories that I talk about here and many more are available on our Twitter at Pan for Compassion, and I will make sure that is linked below. Please sign up for email updates at cannabissaveslives.org, and we send out a periodic medical cannabis news digest where we will compile all of these headlines for you. And basically, we're just going to send you a link to where you can go find them yourself. I'm not going to bombard your mailbox. I'm trying to get people's mailboxes receive links to things differently. And so I'm trying to be aware of that and be kind to your inbox. So I want to thank you all for watching. I want to remind you to please donate. Patient Advocacy Network is a charitable 501c3 organization. We're an educational organization. Your support is always tax deductible. Please visit our website, cannabissaveslives.org. Click the donate button, become a monthly sponsor in any amount that's right for you. Please like, subscribe, and share this video. And until next week, I'm Degé Coutee with Patient Advocacy Network, and this is the Compassion Flower Report.